Cunas T, how are ye? Welcome to the Candlelit Tales Podcast. My name is Serica. I'm sitting down with my brother Aaron.
My name is Aaron, and we are sitting in the office to talk about myths and legends and stories, and above all, the Cailleach.
Hags. Haggerty hags.
Hags and Cailleachs and Cailleachs, and I'm not quite sure how to pronounce them, but they're hags and crones and whatever else. They're all alone up there in the wilderness.
First heard of Cailleachs from my friend Beulah, who's from Donegal. And so she says Cailleach, and so I say Cailleach. And other people say Cailleach, and other people say other things, and that's fine.
That's fair enough.
I'm going to say it the way I learned it.
Won't see things. Yeah, that's not the right way.
There are several different dialects on the island.
There's a million different ways of saying stuff.
It's totally fine.
It's totally grand.
This is people can take issue with things. It's fine.
It is funny though when you hear something said, like when someone says, "Oh, that's lug," and I'm like, "But it's loo." I mean, I've always heard loo, and some people say lug, and then some people say kesser, and we say sesser, and
no, we say kesser.
Yeah, I mean, we used to say sesser. I'm so confused.
I used to say sesser, and then I looked it up, and I was like, "Oh, that makes sense. I've been saying it wrong. There's no soft C's in Irish. Oops. There's no reason it should be sesser at all."
Oops.
But again, that is part of the complication of relying on an oral tradition, is that I tend to go to the version that I first heard of these stories, and I first heard sesser, and I first heard Cailleach.
So why are we talking about the Cailleach in summertime?
Yeah, we're a little bit out of step, aren't we?
But
I always think that, you know, the Cailleach is an interesting one because her opposites are contained within her.
Ooh.
You know, if you look at the Wheel of the Year, and I think especially like it's the end of summer.
Oh man.
It's harvest season. Yeah. We've just had some terrible heat waves, which is the most death-inducing thing that I've ever come across.
I mean, I think it was great.
It's disgusting.
Yeah.
And it's global warming.
You know,
and even if it wasn't global warming, I would still hate it.
You would.
Because I hate heat.
I'm a little bit on the fence about it. I'm like, I mean, it is very nice to be warmed up this, but just turn up the temperature a bit. Here is great because it's kind of, you know, very bland usually. But other countries that are already hot, it's like, for fuck's sake, lads, turn it down.
Yeah, but no, that was too much.
It was a bit much. Now, I will say, you mentioned the harvest, and we had an amazing week for the harvest moon this year. And it was a couple of weeks ago, as we were recording this podcast. It'll be about a month or so when we release.
No, I think this is going out pretty soon.
Oh yeah, it's going out tomorrow.
We are wildly behind on podcasts, everybody. Sorry about that.
Yeah, sorry for missing last week.
We pulled a Haggerty. And we forgot how time works, which is the thing that happens to us kind of a lot.
To
the eternal frustration of everyone who works with us. Sorry, Alan. Sorry, Oisin.
Sorry, Alan.
Sorry, everybody who was expecting a podcast last week also.
My bad.
Our bad.
It's
fine.
Anyway.
I immediately said I'm sorry, and then immediately was like, it's fine. But also, like, it's a free podcast. You're fine.
So, the Harvest Moon, though, I had an amazing experience up in Lough Crew. So I was up there,
yes.
A friend of mine, that was...
Squeaky chair, that was a squeaky chair.
That was a fart noise.
We all know that it's a squeaky chair.
But it's a fart noise.
But it is a fart noise.
So,
sorry, you were having a beautiful farty experience on the full moon.
It was quite noisy, that experience. So, it was my first time in Lough Crew. So I hadn't been to Lough Crew before. And we were up telling stories in Meath across 6 different libraries and
to the kiddies,
and it was beautiful. It's such a nice place to see the landscape, to see the hills, the lakes, the rivers. It is
province
gorgeous.
Of Kings.
It kind of is. I kind of get it now. You know, you're like actually spending enough time there. And so a friend and a collaborator, Seamus O'Doodle on Instagram, as he's known.
You'll find our collaboration with him as part of the 3 videos we did for Imbolg this year.
And Bridget.
The stories of Bridget. So we collaborated with 3 artists, and Seamus was one of them.
Yeah. And he invited me to stay and have a little look at Lough Crew since I was in the locale. And sure, I couldn't turn that down. And in fairness to him, he gathered a great group of men and lads just together to drink tea, sit around a fire, tell stories and connect. and talk about forestry, bringing traditions, breath work, and kind of collaborations that how you get past the mental mundane aspect of everything. And it was a really nice time, and I think men don't tend to do it enough.
Yeah, and dealing with all that man stuff is important.
It's just humaning.
You got to do it.
And the crows agree.
They're seagulls. They're fully seagulls, but they do agree.
They're definitely seagulls, yeah. I meant to call them birds, and the crows came out of my mouth.
Yeah, you got crows on your mind for different reasons. Related to different projects that we're not talking about today.
So many projects.
Which
is great.
It's great. It's not at all overwhelming in the reason everything is late.
We went up and we got there, and I suppose we're out on the fire, we're chatting away, drinking tea and talking, and we're like, we should probably go up before it gets too dark, because we want to be shown around, and I wanted to see it. Of course, by the time we got going, it was dusk was settling in, it was getting dark, and I hadn't been there before, so I wanted to. The following morning, I got up and had a look properly, but I didn't get a chance to see everything in the daytime, and it was clear skies, beautiful. Small bit of clouds were just coming in after a week. Now, this had been a really hot and clear skied week in Ireland, which is very, very rare. In the middle of summer, it was just a heat wave, and this was the first day where we had a bit of clouds. Mm-hmm. And it was nice to see that kind of blanket coming back, to be honest. It was like, ooh. So anyway, walking through the field, I stupidly didn't even bring shoes. I bring these flip-flops, so I walked through barefoot, and Dwayne of the Wolf Academy, what a man. Anyway, he was there walking barefoot, and he was like, yeah, it's fine, until you stand in a thistle, you're like, fucking thistles.
Walking barefoot at night is very good though, because your feet find the path.
They do.
Like if you're actually walking, especially if you're walking, I used to do that in Guatemala a lot.
Yeah, because you're kind of more.
You are able, like you're able to feel the path.
Totally.
Which you're not in sandals.
I
get to a point where I do, like you're able to, if you can't trust your eyes, your feet, if they're tough enough,
totally. So we're walking across, and we walked up to like a couple of the mountains. They were just beautiful, and like the sun was setting, had that kind of golden glow about it, and it was just beautiful. And we kind of, again, there's a place you can kind of get into, like one of the, like there's a few that have been excavated, the stones there in Lough Crew. There's a whole cairn that was dug, and
it's kind of
shit of it, like. Climbing up on that bare feet was tough going.
There's a whole lot of like, you can see the development of archaeology in Ireland through the passage tombs in some ways, because like the original lads were just these kind of, gentleman explorer types, like fucking hobbyists.
And they'd knock into
They just knock straight into the roof, and so as soon as you knock into it, you've destroyed it.
Yeah.
And it's all open to the elements, and it's all going to get weathered away.
Totally.
And then you had the people, later when they were more carefully excavating places like Newgrange, but then they were like, let's fix it. Let's make it fixed.
Yeah.
According to what we think it looked like, which of course then it double meaning of fixed. They fixed it into what they thought it looked like.
Yeah. Well, again, like the
but also did a better job of preserving it. But also there's still a lot of damage happening to that monument because people going in and out of it damages it
constantly. Yeah. And look, this is where I'm gonna I won't say exactly which mountain it was, but we did go into one of them, and it was beautiful. It was serene. It was just gorgeous. And suddenly, like I said, it was clouded. So suddenly, we were looking at the doorway, and we realised the moon was rising. And the moon rose just above the hill. And now, was there 6 of us? All of our heads. It was this beautiful little dance of watching the moon between this doorway of us just kind of shifting, moving to get a different view of it. And we all watched the moon rise, and it was red. It was a red harvest moon. It was just 2 days after being full, and it was just huge still. And like that whole week, I went swimming and seeing the moon as much as I could. But we were all watching it from this ancient area, and it was only in the frame. It was dead bang in the middle of the frame. So like on the axis, it was just pointed towards the harvest moon, which is kind of amazing. That's
pretty fucking cool.
And it rose up, and in the length of time that we were there, and we had a big lovely chant. It was kind of gorgeous, and it was just, we were just basically howling at the moon. But as the moon rose, it disappeared into the clouds, and it was darkness again, and it was obviously, it didn't give us a huge amount of light, But it was just
Full moon gives you a lot of light when you're in the countryside.
And just the difference between it being there and not there.
A lot.
And so obviously we kind of came out, we were all kind of, it was beautiful. And we kind of came out and stood in the fields and walked around another couple of the cairns and just like basked in the glow of that powerful energy. And then just to think of, my God, how old was it? What were they doing back then? Were these places of ceremony? Were these places of ritual, or just tombs, or just left alone? But there's so many of them all dotted around there. You have to expect there was some form of ritual aspect to it. And
you don't know.
Just the ritual of looking at the moon as a group of people, and in this case men, just watching the moon rise, and just something kind of ancient felt, alive inside of us, and we were just like bonded for that experience to be part of that kind of holistic ancient ritual of watching the moon. And from such a sacred old site that had obviously been doing it for so long. The people who built that had also been howling at the moon, or looking at it and calling at it.
Well, they've certainly been looking at it.
Yeah. Whatever way they were doing it, exactly, or relating to
Absolutely. And like that whole relationship. Well, like that's, I think it's something really interesting about those monuments, because they weren't built by the Celts. They were the thing. They were why the Celts thought of the Tuatha Dé Danann as the people under the hill.
That's totally.
Because hills, there are these like eerily regular hills in Ireland, and like you can see it from drone shots. You can see it from above very, very clearly, but you can actually see it in the landscape as well when you're looking around, because you'll see there'll be a hill and then there'll be a mound on the hill that is perfect.
Totally.
And
like,
it's
from
really
miles away.
From miles away. You can see it really obviously, and you can see like all of those areas. There's so many of those sites in Meath and in the kind of heartland of Ireland, and the middle of Ireland and the west of Ireland.
But especially like in Lough Crew,
but there's a huge amount around the Boyne Valley.
Yeah, in the Boyne Valley,
huge amount around there. And there were more discovered over lockdown, again due to drought, and people flying drones, because the grass was all dead.
Wow.
So with the grass all dead and the crops all dead, they could see these ring-shaped indentations showing up in aerial shots. So like there's just an incredible wealth of archaeological stuff there.
Incredible. And I guess, it's funny to go and appreciate the harvest moon, now in Lunasa in August, going into, essentially you can see the leaves on the trees turning.
Well, they're turning fast now because they're dry.
Yeah, but even in the start of August, like there was a turn. There was flowers were dying. That like.
Oh yeah, I mean August is the time of abundance in this country, because that's when the first harvest is.
Yeah.
But it's also the time where like, the
air changes.
The air changes a little bit, and it's only starting now to change a little bit. You're starting to feel that little bit of like. There's a little bit of autumn in the shadows. It's getting dark that little bit earlier. It's not fucking bright till 11 p.m. anymore, which is what makes heat waves in Ireland so punishing, is that the sun stays for such a long time. So like, it's. I think in August you get the feeling of the shadow of the Cailleach is kind of appearing.
And it was particularly powerful with that, like that, amazing amount of sunshine that we had that week, and the moon being so bright, and it just being constantly bright. You'd be going half demented, like.
Well, which that's what I said. Like to me, that is, like, I did not have a good time.
No, you did not.
But also, like, I don't enjoy the heat at the best of times. Particularly, I would rather be cold. I would rather be too cold than too hot all of the time, every time, given any choice.
Exact opposite.
Exact opposite. But like. It's also insomnia. It's also like not being able to sleep in the heat. It's also our houses being designed to keep the heat inside. So all of our buildings are designed to keep things warm. So there's no real getting away from it. But it's also, I mean, for me, there's a real portent in those kind of weather events now. Because this is the acceleration of climate change.
Yeah, no, it's true.
This is all of those things that people were saying, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. It was like, our children are going to be dealing with this. And now we're the children and we're dealing with it. And like, people still aren't. So there's death in the sunshine for me. And there's these kinds of heat waves as well as being something that I experience as being just like generally unpleasant, it are also so out of step with what would, like, the cycles of this planet. You know, this is an aberration. And we know it is, because, you know, we're all having more of these extreme weather events.
Totally.
And they're happening around the world because it's a global problem. And it's a global phenomenon. And, like, it's just, you know, for me, again, that, like, so to explain why I keep talking about death.
Well, it's the Cailleach.
The Cailleach is kind of the she's not a grim reaper, but she is a kind of an embodiment of death in a lot of the stories. And sometimes she's associated with the Morrigan, who's the kind of goddess of battle rage, and sometimes she's a prophet of death, and she will foretell death. And a lot of the time she turns up and she foretells death. But she also has this extraordinary transformational quality, where she turns from hag to beautiful maiden and back again in different stories. So, like, some of the stories we've told about it, Niall of the Nine Hostages, which is one
Classic
of our
example,
you know, a very popular story on the podcast, because a lot of people claim descent from Niall and from the Kings of Ireland.
Specifically Niall of the Nine.
Specifically Niall of the Nine. Clearly he got around. So
fair play to him.
Slutty Niall.
Slutty Niall, as we like to call him.
Yeah, good old Slutty Niall. But like, in that story, the hag turns into a beautiful young woman.
Of course she does.
And she's the goddess of sovereignty. And then there are other stories, like the story of Mongan, where the beautiful young woman turns into the hag. And there are these kinds of reversal stories. And there's also this idea that there's four major festivals in the Celtic kind of wheel of the year. Lunasa is one of them, which is, we're in the month of Lunasa now. And they are in between equinoxes and solstices. So the solstices are the longest days and longest nights, and the equinoxes are the times that are equal.
Shite, why did you do that?
Are you enjoying yourself there?
No, I was going to grab this to give a little...
oh yeah, that is also a circle that has nothing to do with what I'm talking about.
So, I mean, if you're looking on YouTube... No, but like, they're the... they're the solstices.
They'd be the solstices.
They're the
They'd
equinoxes.
be the equinoxes.
And then the festivals, if that's winter and that's summer.
Well, let's make that summer and that winter.
Okay.
Because that makes more sense in my head, because the sun is at the top.
Why would you do that?
Usually it's drawn that way.
I go clockwise and start with Imbolc.
No, you got to start with Samhain.
Okay, yeah, fair enough.
Because Samhain is... So, we're now quibbling about a visual aid that we're drawing in our imaginations. So, there's solstices, there's equinoxes.
You're right.
In between, at the midpoint of each, and they're always on the first of the month, so they're easy to remember, are the Celtic festivals. First one is Samhain. Samhain is the final harvest, the last harvest, and it's the start of winter. And it's obviously coming up, you know.
It's coming up.
People know it now as Halloween, but in Ireland it started as Samhain. The next one then is Imbolc, which is the 1st of February, and that is the Cailleach's particular time, is between Samhain and Imbolc, which is a short enough slice of the year. But it's a quarter, but that's like the winter.
It's the hardest.
The hardest time of year. It's the harshest. It's the deathiest. But again,
the deathiest.
There's that whole idea of Imbolc being the time that the Cailleach turns again to the maiden.
Yeah. And I love that turning, because it's the turning of the cloak, it's the turning into Bridget, it's the bringer of life, it's the reversal of life and death. It's that cycle that happens anyway and continues.
And it's also that like that day-night cycle that you get in Celtic kind of thought of, like, the wheel of the year is like the wheel of a day is like the wheel of a month, that you have a dark half and a light half of everything. So if you think of the month, and, you know, particularly connected to the moon, you have a bright half of the month where the moon is full and close to full, and you have a dark half of the month where it's new and close to new. And then you have the dark half of the year, the light half of the year. Somewhere in winter you have the dark, you have the night and day. And then there's also, that goes out to the idea of, like, there are light years and there are dark years. And there are light decades and there are dark decades, and there are light periods and there are periods of darkness. So it's this whole kind of idea of there constantly being movement and constantly being flux, but also we are always part of a cycle, and death is part of that cycle, and rebirth is also part of that cycle, but like death is never not there. So I think that's kind of, you know, when I'm thinking about things like climate change and our ability to wipe ourselves off the planet, the thing that kind of, you know, I think it's really easy to get into despair about that.
Sure.
I think it's really easy to kind of see the scale of that and go, okay, we're absolutely fucked. Can't do anything. Therefore, anything we do isn't worth it.
Yeah, and get into helplessness and problematic.
Which, like, the thing is, there's a part of me that's like, that might be true. Like, that actually genuinely might be true. There might be nothing we can do, but like, I will have a better life if I believe that my actions have some kind of an impact, even if it's not entirely true.
Sure.
But my life and the lives of the people around me will be better if I live with purpose rather than despair. And
integrity in that purpose.
And integrity in that purpose. And the only chance we have of survival is if we live with purpose and integrity.
Yeah.
Because if we all give in to despair and we only let the people who are deluded into thinking nothing is happening fucking run amok and run the show, then we are doomed.
And it's also a reminder for me that like they're almost kind of primordial beings in the sense when you think of the Cailleach and the winter or the harbinger of death. It's like, it's not just the banshee calling and prophesizing death. It's like the person that will meet you always. You will always meet death in many different ways and guises, because you'll meet her as she takes your friends and your family away, and you will eventually meet her yourself. And it's not the Grim Reaper, it's just the ever-present sense of grief and death that's always there, and like
it's always going to be there.
It's always going to be there, and it's like, it's how do we hold our heads high rather than hang our heads in despair while that cloud is always going to be there. And that idea of, okay, there's a cloud, but it's not the whole sky. Like,
yeah,
you know, there's a winter wind.
There's a winter wind, but I also think that the hint in how to deal with it as well is in the story. Yeah. Because if you kiss her, she gentles.
Whereas if you brace and you
if you fight her, or you try and possess her,
and again,
you're fucked.
That's the story. I mean, you know, the story of Loch Crew is the fact that, you know, it's that kind of, it's the story of making sense of a landscape, making an understanding, like the Celts coming here and seeing, oh, hang on, there were people thousands of years ago here, or like it looks like people are living still underneath the hills. So it's kind of an explanation story bit.
It's the closest that we get to kind of a you know, an explanation story in Irish myth of like, this is why this is the way it is.
Yeah.
And we talked to Russell about that actually in an interview that will be coming out at some point, about the absence of pourquoi stories in Irish myth. But like, I think that's kind of the closest to it that we have, and it's not even really that kind of story. It's just like, this is the explanation for the landscape, as you said. Yeah,
and I suppose like the fact that she leaves, she drops the stones, and you know, does she die at the end? You know, some say she does. She's similar to Boan or Taltu for dying and doing something and being remembered as the location. But I love how you ended it, like, you know, these things never die, really. The Cailleach can never die.
To me, she's not person enough to die.
Yeah.
Like, she's, in the stories that I know her of, she's such a kind of a figure of incredible power, but like, she's not, and this is not true of most of the sort of Tuatha Dé Danann characters in Irish myth. Most of them are quite person-like. Like, you know, Boan's a river, but she's mostly a lady. Like, and she's a woman you can sort of relate to. Like, she's a person with emotions. She's a person with curiosity and desire and things like that. Whereas the Cailleach kind of stands a little bit outside of that. And like, you know, she does have desires and she does have rages and she does, you know, go for things and she does strive for things, but there's something a little bit ungraspable about her for me.
Yeah.
And I also feel like I would prefer not to, at this point in my life, not to wrestle with her too deeply.
No, and I think
I feel like she's one of those ones that looks back.
Yeah. Well, again, like, kind of looking at the story of Cú Chulainn, who, you know, I think it was a really interesting, you know, step into that story, because I told that live to a great, you know, kind of energy and fun, and the fact that Cuchulainn couldn't look at the Cailleach because she had the hair of her pubic hair was along the ground underneath her skirt,
which is actually from the Conor Moore story.
Yeah, well, like I should put that into every.
You can put it into every Cailleach story because it kills.
So, you put it in, and everyone's laughing and growing, and oh God, she's so rotten, and she's there trying to kiss you, and like, oh God. So that's all well and good and funny, and the description of old age and cronism, and the kind of disgust of the Cailleach or the crone or the old hag.
And it's the disgust of age and aging bodies and disability and all of that, like, when you dig into why that's funny, it's kind of gross.
It's kind of gross. Funny. It's kind of, well, like, again, it's holding a mirror up, really. It's kind of going, do you find it gross?
Well, yeah, but like we do find it gross. We do, but like we find it gross because...
Interrogate it.
Have a look. Why is it funny?
And the you mentioned Niall of the Nine, Conor Moore, the kings and the ones who can face, and Diarmid and Diarmid of the Fianna, when he went under wave, he meets the Cailleach, he kisses her. They're able to be kingly, step above pride of their own self, to not be looking down on someone like the Cailleach or the hag and deeming them less desirable, but just giving themselves to the moment of their presence and their companionship in a way that gets past the kind of the outer layer of their visible presence.
Well, I also think there's probably a Jungian perspective on that as well, in that it is the king is supposed to have to unite with the feminine, and there's often, like, when we think of the feminine, particularly in a very patriarchal setting, it's pretty and soft and accommodating.
Maiden, yeah.
And it's maiden, and actually the king has to contend with the whole of the feminine, which is also devouring, destroying, death-giving winter. And, that aspect of the kind of horrifying feminine, which shows up in a lot of mythology. You have all these, like, there's so many female monsters that are female from the waist up, which really tells you how, like, it really says a lot about that whole, like, body disgust, like the body horror of, like, ordinary female anatomy. Is actually really high in kind of cultural stories. Yeah. Like, you think of the mermaid, like, she's got a fishtail.
Totally.
And she's got pretty tits. So, like, she's got the nice half of lady, and the ugly half is monster. And there's, like, there's mermaids, and there's lamias, and there's all these kinds of creatures that have monstrous lower halves, which is really interesting. And I think the Cailleach and her, her embodiment of all of the things that are gross and horrifying and frightening and intimidating about the feminine. And again, that kind of, like, the feminine in all of us.
Totally, yeah.
Aspect of, like, the totality of it, and the totality of us as humans having to grapple with, as, our own bodies aging and decaying and getting gross and smelly.
So here's something I'm grappling with in terms of just the aging process, and, like, okay, so you've the maiden, the mother, and the crone is the kind of, like, the pretty and the beautiful, the stepping into power and, like, being a mother, and then stepping into being an elder, essentially, is what the crone, the hag, would be in. And I suppose Cailleach could also be seen as, like, a derogatory kind of a name to call someone slanderously.
Well, it's not actually. Cailleach. It's quite it's like, again, I heard this from my friend from Donegal, and Cailleach is just what you call an old lady. Right. Like, it's actually not it's not at all an insult. It's kind of a respectful term where she comes from.
Yeah, again, depends where it's from. Like, I would have heard that and kind of assumed, like, old vicious fucking Cailleach.
Yeah, well, I mean, in English, old hag is a fucking insult.
Yeah. But
here again, we hit against a little interesting.
So thing. What's the male counterpart for that? Is there one?
In as much as there is one, yeah, because it's I think it's the youth and the warrior and the king.
Youth, warrior,
but
king.
You can also go, it's the youth and the maiden, the father with the mother.
Yeah. And
the sage with the crone.
That
I think is what it is.
Yeah, again.
But I don't really remember. Like, I mean, you see more of the maiden mother crone, like you see it in Sandman. You see it in, like, popular culture and, like, the Hecate and all that kind of stuff. And it's a real, like, the three fates of Greek mythology.
Totally.
But yeah, I mean, there's that counterpart. And again, there's ways of kind of there's ways in which those are very similar to each other, and then there's kind of shades of difference between them. But yeah, like it's the stages of life in some ways as well.
And it's just...
And I mean, Maiden Mother Crone is kind of interesting because, again, this is one that comes out of kind of a more, you know, that Greek myth kind of idea of the 3 stages, but like most of them are defined relationally. Like you're a maiden if you're a virgin.
Yeah.
You're a mother if you're married and you have children. And Crone is the only one who stands apart.
Yeah.
And so Crone is kind of always the most fearsome and the most powerful.
Because it's separate.
Because she's separate, because she doesn't need anybody. And we'll talk in the next chat we have actually about like that power of removing yourself from humanity and how that taps into a lot of strength, but also a lot of like...
And fear.
Messiness.
Well, fear.
And well, other people will fear you.
Absolutely.
There's a reason people fucking burnt witches, because they were the old women who lived outside of town. Like,
yeah, totally.
Shit's scary.
And they were the, you know, in some ways the female sages, or called the witches and called the crones and the hags and the Cailleachs, because of that. But you know, the thing that helped me tell that story was a comment you made about the fact that Cuchulainn can't get out of warrior youth. Or youth warrior.
Yeah, Cuchulainn dies a boy.
You know, he is a boy. He wants to be a warrior. I think he's always striving to be a great warrior.
Yeah, but a warrior
that's as far
is a boy.
As he gets. Yeah, that's as far as he gets. He doesn't get to father. He doesn't get really.
No, and like the kind of Campbellian prescription for that is that you go from warrior to king or die.
Yeah.
Like not all warriors make it, and Cuchulainn is one. Cuchulainn is very much someone who dies a boy. Like, you know, his attempt at fatherhood ends with him killing his son.
Exactly.
Like he's not, but I think the Cailleach, and it's that thing of like he's defeated by his pride every time, because he's never able to step outside his role as warrior to say, no, actually there's a bigger thing going on here than my duty and my honor and my place in the tribe. And so he's never able to get into a more expansive space.
No.
And so he will never grow up. Because there is something about like, and I don't think this is a male-female thing. I think this is a maturation thing.
Maturation thing, yeah.
I think there is a moment.
Struggle with that one.
I did. Oof. There's an internalization of rules and mores and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But there's also a moment at which everybody has to kind of go, well, where does this actually sit with me?
Right.
And does this actually sit with me? And how does this feel with me and my values and my sense of integrity and my sense of purpose? And if it doesn't chime with that, there are those, you know, for me, the fundamentally kind of mythically immature thing to do is to sit on it and swallow it and go back into the crowd. Whereas the actual risky but necessary for your own development thing is to stand up and say, hey, the group that I'm part of, this thing we're doing, I think is maybe not okay. And like, we all know the risk of that.
Yeah, to go against the tide.
Because it's to go against the group. It's to go against the tide. And like, I think everybody comes to that point in their life. And I think everybody, you know, listening to this can think of a moment or 2 moments where that choice was presented.
Certainly, yeah.
And, you know, will again, because it comes up.
Yeah, and it's the refusal of the hero, and I'm using hero in terms of your own personal journey and your own hero's journey. It's the choice to, you know, take the dark night of the soul, that moment where you kind of admit that you've lost something or everything. I acknowledge that, you know, grief, despair, loneliness, that aspect of whatever you're dealing with, and, you know, try and work through it by meeting it head on. And that's what I think the Cailleach represents. Like, it's the death.
I was going to say be careful with your laptop about 20 minutes ago, but no, I didn't. But it's also, there's a reason why most of the warriors die before they become kings, is because that's a risky thing to do.
Yeah.
To stand up to the group you're part of and say, this thing that we're doing, I think that's going to tip. This thing that we're doing, I think is not okay, is like an extremely risky proposition.
Sorry, I nearly just dropped my laptop again. But
you nearly just dropped your laptop again.
I think that's a good place for us to bring this chat to a close.
Okay.
Because we've talked about the Cailleach, we've talked about Loch Crew, and how she created the landscape, and how she kissed Cuchulainn, but, well, he never
he didn't kiss her back.
And he ran away from it, and as a result, never reached that kind of
Yeah. I mean, I think there were several moments where he had the opportunity. I think there were always several moments where we have the opportunity.
And he never did. He never
did it.
He couldn't quite kiss the hag. Couldn't quite kiss the hag. Thanks very much for listening, guys. We'll be back with more Mythic Places. We're continuing this series. Click subscribe and like the video. Sharing is caring and all the rest of it. And if you want to support the podcast, you can go patreon.com/Candlelit Tales. The links are below, and you can listen out for more stories coming very soon on the Candlelit Tales podcast. Chat to you next time.
Hey.